Hollywood silenced the homosexual stars whose careers were ruined. The Academy Award was still warm in Julian Mercer's hands when the studio executive leaned in close enough for him to smell bourbon and cigars and whispered that they knew about the boy in his pool house, knew about the parties in the hills, knew everything, and if he wanted to keep making pictures, he would marry the starlet they had chosen within 6 months, or watch his career dissolve like sugar in rain. The golden statue suddenly felt like a prison bar, cold and heavy, and Julian understood with crystalline clarity that he had just won the highest honour in Hollywood. On the same night, he would lose everything that mattered, including the man waiting for him at home, who had held him through every anxious moment, leading to this triumph that now tasted like ashes in his mouth. The year was 1954, and Hollywood gleamed with a surface perfection that concealed rot beneath like a beautiful apple crawling with worms at its core, and Julian Mercer was its newest Best Actor winner, a matinee idol whose chiseled jaw and penetrating blue eyes had made millions of women swoon, and millions of men secretly wish they could be more than admirers from afar. The studio system controlled everything from what stars ate for breakfast to who they loved, or at least who they pretended to love, and contractual morality clauses gave executives power that would make dictators envious the ability to destroy lives with a single phone call to the right gossip columnist. Victor Ashford had been waiting in Julian's Spanish colonial mansion in the Hollywood Hills, pacing the terrazzo floors in his tuxedo, watching the ceremony on their new television, set a luxury that felt like a miracle, bringing the world into their private sanctuary where they could finally be themselves without the suffocating weight of pretense. He had champagne, cooling in silver buckets, had covered their bed in rose petals, like a scene from one of Julian's pictures, had planned a celebration that would honour both the public achievement and their private love, the relationship they had hidden for 7 years behind a careful facade of friendship and shared business interests. When Julian walked through the door statue in hand, but face drained of colour, Victor knew before a word was spoken that their carefully constructed world was collapsing, could read it in the slump of shoulders that had just carried the weight of Hollywood glory and now bore something far heavier. The champagne went undrunk, the rose petals undisturbed, as Julian recounted the executive's threat, in a voice hollowed out by the realization that success in their world meant choosing between career and authenticity, between public adoration and private truth, between the life he had built and the love that sustained it. They had always known the risks, had seen what happened to others who got careless or unlucky careers, ending overnight when the wrong photo surfaced or the wrong person talked, but somehow they had believed their discretion would protect them, that Julian's rising star would make him too valuable to destroy. Victor was a screenwriter, brilliant but blacklisted during the Red Scare for supposed communist sympathies that were really just code for homosexual tendencies, reduced to writing under pseudonyms, while Julian fronted their production company, their professional partnership, providing cover for their personal one. The irony cut deep that Julian had just won an Oscar for playing a man torn between duty and desire. Critics praising his portrayal of forbidden love without knowing he lived that conflict every day. That every longing glance on screen came from a well of personal experience that would destroy him if exposed. The studio had packaged his pain as entertainment profited from emotions they would punish him for feeling in real life, turned his hidden truth into box office gold, while threatening to bury him if that truth ever surfaced. Margaret Sterling was 23, blonde and virginal in that specific way. Hollywood manufactured a contract player. The studio was grooming for stardom who needed the publicity boost of dating an established leading man. The magazines would love it, the studio executive had explained with reptilian satisfaction. Beauty and the Beast actor, except reverse the handsome prince, elevating the unknown princess to his level of fairy tale romance that would sell tickets and satisfy the moral guardians who measured America's virtue by its movie stars' bedrooms. Julian had met Margaret 2 days after the ultimatum at a carefully orchestrated studio lunch, where photographers just happened to be present, where their tables just happened to be adjacent, where her laugh at his scripted witticisms just happened to carry across the commissary. She was beautiful in that interchangeable way the studio preferred, all surface shine and no sharp edges. But her eyes held a sadness that made Julian wonder what threats had brought her to this arranged meeting, what dreams she was sacrificing on the altar of manufactured romance. Their first date was a premiere at Grauman's Chinese Theatre. Julian in his tuxedo, and Margaret in a gown the studio had selected to complement his eyes flashbulbs, exploding as they walked the red carpet in a mockery of romance that felt like swallowing glass with every smile. She played her part, perfectly gazing at him, with practised adoration, clutching his arm like he was her lifeline, in a sea of attention, and Julian recognised a fellow performer trapped in a role neither had auditioned for, but both were contractually obligated to play. Back home, Victor waited in the shadows of their life, the pool house converted to an office where he wrote scripts that Julian would pretend to have discovered their collaboration, reduced to secret meetings that looked like business consultations. The passion that had once burned between them wild and consuming turned bitter with resentment and grief, every moment tainted by the knowledge that Julian spent his public hours holding another hand, kissing another mouth for cameras, building a false life that threatened to eclipse their real one. The wedding was set for 6 months later at the Beverly Hills Hotel, a spectacle designed to maximum publicity impact, with every detail, from Margaret's dress to the flower arrangements chosen by studio publicists who treated their union like a product launch. Julian moved through preparations like a sleepwalker fitting for tuxedos and tasting wedding cakes while his actual life crumbled. Victor growing more distant with each magazine spread, celebrating the romance of the century, each article gushing about chemistry that existed only in publicity stills. It was Margaret who broke first, finding Julian on the terrace during their engagement party, a lavish affair at the studio head's mansion where everyone who mattered in Hollywood had gathered to celebrate their contractual commitment. She was slightly drunk enough to let her mask slip, and told him she knew exactly what this was, that she had her own reasons for agreeing her own secrets, that made a sham marriage preferable to exposure. Her girlfriend worked in the costume department at Metro, she confessed, and this arrangement would protect them both, give them cover to continue their real lives behind the facade. The revelation should have been a relief, finding an ally in this forced performance, but it only deepened Julian's despair at what their industry demanded, the elaborate lies required to simply exist, the way love itself became a liability in a world that sold romance as its primary product. He and Margaret developed a strange friendship, born of mutual imprisonment, comparing notes on maintaining their charades, coordinating stories to ensure their deceptions aligned, becoming expert liars in service of hiding their truths. The wedding night was a masterpiece of performance, Julian carrying Margaret over the threshold of their honeymoon suite at the Ambassador Hotel, while photographers captured the moment, then sitting on opposite beds once the door closed, still in their wedding finery, but finally able to drop their masks in the one space where they did have to pretend attraction. They ordered room service and played cards until dawn, talking about the lovers they had left behind, for this moment the real partners waiting in the shadows while they performed heterosexuality for the masses. Victor began drinking heavily, the brilliant writer who had created some of Julian's best roles, drowning his talent in bourbon and bitterness, unable to watch the man he loved build a false life in public while their real connection withered in private. Their stolen moments became arguments, accusations flying like knives, Victor demanding to know why Julian had chosen career over love. Julian firing back that Victor didn't understand the pressure, the threats, the entire machinery designed to crush anyone who stepped out of line. The studio system was already showing cracks by the late 50s, television eating into profits, and stars beginning to demand more control, but morality clauses remained ironclad, homosexuality still grounds for immediate termination and blacklisting. Julian watched other actors navigate the same impossible choices, Rock Hudson marrying Phyllis Gates, in a union everyone in Hollywood knew was arranged, Tab Hunter dating starlets while living with Anthony Perkins, an entire generation of queer performers, forced to split themselves in half to survive. Margaret developed her own coping mechanisms, prescription pills that helped her smile through public appearances, and stronger drugs that numbed her during private hours, the strain of living multiple lives taking its toll in ways the fan magazines never captured. Her girlfriend, Diane, sometimes joined them for dinners at the house, these strange gatherings of 4 people, in 2 real couples, pretending to be something else, entirely finding moments of authentic connection amid the elaborate deception. Julian's career soared, even as his soul shriveled the sham marriage, generating exactly the publicity the studio wanted his box office appeal, somehow enhanced by the perception of stable heterosexuality. He made 3 films in 2 years each role, requiring him to portray romantic love he wasn't allowed to feel in reality. Kissing leading ladies with the same mechanical precision he brought to kissing Margaret at premieres. All of it performance, without passion, technical excellence, masking emotional emptiness. The breaking point came during production of Midnight in Malibu, a romantic drama where Julian played a man choosing between 2 lovers, art imitating life, in ways that cut too close to truth. His co-star was a young method actor named James Holden, beautiful and bold in ways that reminded Julian of Victor, before bitterness had hardened him, before compromise had dulled his edges. James was openly pursuing Julian, not knowing or not caring about the danger, leaving notes in his dressing room and lingering looks that the crew began to notice. One night after shooting, James cornered Julian in his trailer, the air electric with possibility and danger, and kissed him with a hunger that Julian had almost forgotten, existed years of careful control, shattered by the simple act of being desired without pretense. They made love with the desperate passion of the condemned, knowing, even as their bodies connected, that this was both beginning and ending, that Julian had already sacrificed too much to risk what little remained of his constructed life. But crew members talk, and someone had seen James enter the trailer and not emerge for hours, had drawn conclusions that spread through Hollywood's whisper network like wildfire. The studio head called Julian in for a meeting that felt like an execution, laying out photographs taken by a private investigator, grainy but clear enough to destroy everything. The ultimatum this time was simple. James would be fired and blacklisted, the film shut down at massive cost, unless Julian proved his commitment to his marriage in ways that would leave no room for doubt. Margaret was pregnant within 2 months, the studio doctor confirming what everyone treated as a miracle, but felt like another bar in their elaborate cage. The pregnancy was difficult, Margaret's drug use making everything complicated, and Julian found himself genuinely caring for this woman who had become his strangest friend, their mutual suffering, creating a bond that transcended their forced union. He held her hair during morning sickness and held her hand during doctor appointments, playing the devoted husband with a conviction born of genuine affection, if not romantic love. Victor left Los Angeles entirely moving to New York, where he could write for theatre without the suffocating morality of Hollywood, sending Julian a letter that said everything and nothing, words between the lines, expressing love and loss, and the recognition that some wounds cut too deep to heal. Julian kept the letter in his wallet next to a photo from their early days, 2 young men laughing on a beach, unaware that their love would become a casualty of success in an industry that demanded human sacrifice. The baby was born on a Tuesday morning, a daughter they named Sophia after Julian's grandmother, and holding this tiny life that existed because of studio demands and contractual obligations, Julian felt something shift inside him. This child was innocent of the lies that created her, deserved better than parents, trapped in mutual deception, needed truth, even if the world that made her couldn't handle it. Margaret, exhausted and raw from delivery, looked at him with understanding, knowing that something had changed, that their careful performance couldn't continue indefinitely. James Holden was found dead in his West Hollywood apartment. 6 months later, an overdose that everyone knew was suicide. But no one would say aloud another casualty of an industry that created beauty while destroying those who embodied it. Julian attended the funeral, despite studio warning sitting in the back row, as they buried a man whose only crime had been refusing to hide, whose defiance had cost him everything, but maintained his integrity in ways Julian envied and mourned. The 60s brought changes that felt both too late and just in time, the studio system collapsing, and with it some of the most oppressive controls over stars' personal lives. Julian and Margaret divorced quietly, citing irreconcilable differences that everyone understood meant the contract had expired, their performance no longer required by changing times. They maintained friendship and shared custody of Sophia, who grew up understanding that love came in many forms and that her parents' affection for each other, while real, was not the romantic kind the world had been sold. Margaret found happiness with Diane moving to San Francisco, where they could live openly in ways Hollywood still wouldn't allow, running a bookstore that became a gathering place for the queer community. She sent Julian postcards from pride parades and protest marches, finding in activism the voice that had been silenced during their studio years, transforming from victim to advocate with a ferocity that made Julian proud to have shared those difficult years with her. Julian attempted to reconnect with Victor, tracking him down to a brownstone in Greenwich Village where he was writing plays that told their stories with names changed but emotions intact. The reunion was awkward and painful, two men trying to bridge years of separation and betrayal, the passion that had once burned between them reduced to embers that couldn't quite reignite. They parted as friends, which felt like both more and less than what they had been, a resolution that satisfied neither but was all they could manage. The 70s found Julian transitioning from leading man to character actor. His matinee idol look softened by age and hard living into something more interesting, more real. He took roles in independent films that the old studio system would have forbidden, playing complex characters whose sexuality was ambiguous or irrelevant, finding artistic freedom in projects that valued truth over marketability. Young directors sought him out specifically because of his history, wanting the authenticity that came from lived experience, the weight of real pain informing performance. He began speaking more openly about his past, carefully at first testing how much truth the world could handle about its former fantasies. In interviews, he would mention the lavender marriages of Hollywood's golden age, the way studios had controlled every aspect of stars' lives, never quite confessing his own participation, but making it clear he had witnessed the damage firsthand. Film historians and queer scholars began piecing together the truth, reading between the lines of his carefully worded revelations. Sophia grew into a fierce advocate for LGBTQ rights, shaped by the truth her parents had finally shared about their marriage and the industry that had demanded it. She became a documentary filmmaker, turning her camera on Hollywood's hidden history, interviewing survivors of the studio system who are finally free to speak their truths. Julian participated in her film, sitting in his living room, surrounded by memorabilia from a career built on deception, finally telling the whole story of his Oscar night and the ultimatum that had changed everything. The documentary, titled The Celluloid Closet, premiered at Sundance to standing ovations and death threats, the divide between progress and prejudice still sharp decades after Julian's forced marriage. He attended the premiere with Sophia walking the red carpet as himself, for the first time no longer performing heterosexuality for cameras, but simply existing as a man who had loved and lost and survived an industry that had tried to erase his truth. Letters poured in from around the world, other survivors sharing their stories, young actors thanking him for the revelation that they weren't alone in their struggles. The film won awards and started conversations forcing Hollywood to confront its history of discrimination and the human cost of enforced conformity. Julian found himself an unexpected elder statesman of queer cinema, invited to panels and retrospectives where his films were recontextualized through the lens of his revealed truth. Victor saw the documentary in New York, sending Julian a note that simply said, "Finally, acknowledgement of stories told and truths revealed after decades of silence." They met once more before Victor's death from AIDS-related complications. In 1987, two old men sitting in a hospital room, holding hands without fear. For the first time since their youth, the weight of years and loss and love filling the space between them. Victor's last words to Julian were, "It was worth it. though neither was quite sure what it meant, their love or their suffering, or simply their survival. Julian established a foundation in Victor's name, supporting young LGBTQ writers and filmmakers who might otherwise be silenced by industry prejudice or economic pressure. He mentored actors struggling with their identities in an industry that still, despite progress, preferred its stars straight or silent sharing, hard-won wisdom about the cost of hiding and the price of revelation. His Beverly Hills home became a salon for queer artists, the same rooms that had once hosted sham wedding planning now filled with authentic community. In his 80s, Julian was honoured with a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Academy, the same organisation whose threats had shaped his life, standing to applaud his survival and contributions. In his acceptance speech, he held the statue that had once felt like a prison and spoke about second acts and redemption, about an industry capable of both creating and destroying dreams, about the young actors who could now live openly in ways his generation had been denied. He thanked Margaret, who was in the audience with Diane, their strange partnership having evolved into genuine family. He thanked Sophia for forcing him to confront his truth through her lens. He even thanked the studio executives who had given him impossible choices, acknowledging that their cruelty had been systemic rather than personal, that they too had been trapped in societal expectations that damaged everyone they touched. But mostly he thanked Victor, speaking his name publicly as his lover for the first time, refusing to let death erase what fear had hidden. The speech went viral clips shared by young people who couldn't imagine a world where love required such elaborate deception, where careers depended on denying fundamental truths. Julian received messages from actors currently in glass closets, some considering coming out, others explaining why they couldn't yet. The industry's prejudices evolved but not eliminated. He responded to each one with patience and understanding, knowing that every journey toward authenticity followed its own timeline. His final film was a small independent production directed by Sophia, playing an elderly gay man, reflecting on a life of necessary lies and unexpected truths. The role required him to kiss another man on screen, something the studio system had made unthinkable, but which now felt like completion of a circle public acknowledgement of what had always been true but never allowed. The film received limited distribution but profound impact, particularly among older LGBTQ viewers who saw their own hidden histories reflected. Julian died at 91, surrounded by chosen family in the home where he had once hidden his truth. His obituary in major newspapers acknowledged both his artistic achievements and his personal journey, the forced marriage to Margaret treated as historical fact rather than shameful secret. The industry that had once threatened to destroy him for loving men now celebrated him as a pioneer who had survived and exposed its darkest practices, though he knew such recognition came too late for too many. His papers donated to the UCLA Film Archive revealed the full extent of the studio system's control over queer performers' contracts, with morality clauses highlighted and annotated correspondence showing the network of arranged marriages and manufactured romances designed to hide truth behind heterosexual performance. Scholars would spend decades analysing these documents, building understanding of how homophobia had shaped not just individual lives, but the entire mythology of American cinema. The house in the hills was turned into a museum preserving both Julian's public career and private truth, the pool house where Victor had written, restored as a testament to their collaboration and love. Visitors could see the Oscar. Julian had won on the night everything changed, displayed next to the letter Victor had written when leaving for New York, artifacts of a love story Hollywood had tried to silence, but which ultimately outlasted the system that had oppressed it. Young actors made pilgrimages to the museum, seeking connection to history and inspiration for their own journeys. They stood in rooms where Julian and Victor had loved secretly, where Margaret and Diane had found each other amid forced performance, where Sophia had grown up understanding that family could be created from the strangest circumstances. The guides, many of them LGBTQ youth who had found refuge in Julian's foundation, told these stories with pride and pain, ensuring that the cost of progress was neither forgotten nor repeated. In the end, Julian's legacy was not just the films he had made or the awards he had won, but the truth he had finally told and the paths he had helped clear for others. His story, and the stories of countless others silenced by Hollywood's homophobia, became part of the cultural record impossible to erase or ignore. The industry that had once demanded he choose between career and authenticity eventually gradually, painfully learned that such choices diminished not just individuals but the art itself, that truth enhanced rather than threatened the magic of cinema. The final frame of Sophia's documentary showed Julian at 90 walking the beach where he and Victor had been photographed in their youth alone, but not lonely, carrying within him all the loves and losses that had shaped his journey. His voice-over spoke words that had taken a lifetime to say aloud. I loved a man when loving men could end careers, and I survived to see a world where such love needs no hiding, though the scars remain of all we lost in silence, all who fell while walking between truth and necessity, all whose stories Hollywood buried beneath false narratives and forced conformity, but love itself survived patient and persistent waiting for the world to catch up to what we always knew, that hearts recognise each other regardless of the roles we are forced to play. That truth eventually surfaces no matter how deep the burial, that even the most powerful system of control cannot ultimately silence the human need to love and be loved authentically, completely, without apology or artifice. The waves crashed endlessly on the shore, indifferent to human struggle, but somehow comforting in their permanence, and Julian walked into the sunset not as a tragic figure, but as a survivor carrying the stories of all who had been silenced, speaking their names into the ocean wind, ensuring that Hollywood's buried history would never again be forgotten, that the price of authenticity in an industry built on illusion would be remembered and honoured by those who came after walking more freely because others had walked in shadows, loving more openly because others had loved in secret, living truth, because others had been forced to live lies.